I'm Eva. I think that was already covered. I do want to start with a small introduction using some really fun symbols. I studied econometrics in Rotterdam at the Erasmus University, and then I noticed I really liked coding. I actually started to take some machine learning classes, which is a bit more on the data and AI part than my talk is going to be about. And I actually also gave some workshops on that and also on data literacy, for example. So I do like to give trainings, but I also like to code a bit myself. Then I worked as a freelancer for about a year, and I noticed that sometimes it's quite difficult to get to sort of, okay, what is the project that we actually need? What are we actually going to develop? Instead of just saying we're going to do something with AI or we're going to use data to fix all the problems, and then it can be difficult to communicate what is actually necessary or what would be of value. Then after that freelance sort of year, I did go back to uni. I had a master's in communication design for innovation, so blah, 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 but that's mainly about how to do interviews and surveys and a lot more soft science than I was used to. But I also went back to mathematics. And then I studied operations research, which is going to be the topic of my talk. But the main reason for me to show like sort of little timeline is because my talk is also going to be about how to make sure that your project actually works in the real world. And that we're not just going to develop fancy solutions that then do not really fit with the people that are going to be either affected by them or are supposed to use them. Then, oh yeah, nurses. But I'll talk about them for a long time. I like to make clothes. I actually make these pants because I'm a bit too tall to buy all the regular pants. And I like to drive a motorcycle. And I got my eyes lasered. So if you see me blink excessively, then it's because I need to, because otherwise my eyes get too dry. It's more of a note to self. That's that. I will talk about the scheduling problem. So what it is, how it's defined, what all sort of plays a role when making a schedule, for employees, that is. Then I will talk a bit about mathematical optimization, happy nurses, what does it actually mean, talk about optimization at Ortec, the company I'm working for right now, and then, well, the drinks, or actually not yet the drinks, but they are part of the agenda. The near scheduling problem. So I actually did my thesis on this, and then after I finished my thesis, then, well, basically my thesis supervisor decided to leave the company, and they asked me to stay. So I'm still working on the near scheduling problem. And it is a problem. Well, I'm sorry, it's a Dutch newspaper, but I can translate. It's basically about the shortages in the labor market for healthcare. So we have a lot of elderly people, and we need to make sure that we can take care of everybody, not just the elderly, but this shortage sort of makes it more difficult. So what also makes it difficult is that schedules have to adhere to complex labor laws. So if you're making a schedule for, could be nurses, could also be, I don't know, cleaning crews, flight crews, any crew. Then you have to adhere to labor laws specifying, for example, that people have to get enough rest in the day. So your shifts cannot take, 14 hours, and then they cannot expect you to be back the next day at 7 a.m. Enough weekly rest, but also enough rest after night shifts. So this is specifically for the nurse scheduling problem. If people are working night shifts, then after that they have to get time to sleep, have a proper day off, and you have to take it all into account, which is all defined by labor laws. So the aim of my thesis research, but now also the current project, is can we improve nurse satisfaction by better taking into account their preferences in scheduling? So to deal with the shortages, we want to make sure that they're more satisfied and they stay within no problem. Stay at their jobs, basically. So if we can make them happier with the schedule, then at least that will probably not be the reason for them to leave their job. That's the basic sort of aim. Then we can make schedules that meet all the patient demands. So that would be schedules that make sure that when somebody needs someone at their bed, that there will be a nurse available. And also this translates to other sectors. And then there will be also schedules that lead to happy nurses. Always somebody then asks, okay, but in the happy nurses schedule, if you just do not assign any shift, then they're going to be happy because they will get paid for doing nothing. So in the end, we want to balance both, where the capacity coverage is a bit more important, I would say, because yeah, it's the main objective. But then, how do we include and measure nurse satisfaction? With me or because this is actually quite difficult. You can ask people, what do you like about your schedule? And then you will get a lot of stories. And you can ask people, what do you not like about the schedule? And then get even more stories. So we want to get it into a formula that we can then use to measure, okay, this schedule scores an 8 out of 10 or a 4 out of 10 in terms of nurse satisfaction. And then the goal is if we can measure it, then we can also optimize for it. That's where mathematical optimization then comes into play. But also known as what do people want, and that's difficult to sometimes get out of them. So a simple overview, let's say you're a planner, then you want to make sure that you meet the labor laws and you meet the demands, but also keep it a bit fair. But if you're a planner, if you're an employee, then you probably want to make sure that you're home enough. So you have like a proper weekend off and not one day off, but you have to be at work again in, I don't know, 4 hours or early in the day, like the next day. And then sometimes you do not really perceive your weekend off as a whole weekend off because you are already thinking about work. They also want to have enough time and support to deliver good work. So if you're always in a rush because there are not enough colleagues or you don't have enough time for your shift, then it's also not really good for employee satisfaction. Because in the end, they do want to deliver something good. And also they care about fairness. But then how do you translate this to the mathematical optimization part? So a common approach in literature, in studies, but also in practice, is to say, okay, we'll just give people a schedule for a month, for example, and just ask them, okay, do you want to work this day or not? And then if we meet these preferences, then we can say, okay, now they're probably happy with the schedule. But it's quite limiting. And I then thought, okay, what if we actually go to nurses and ask them? So I went to 2 hospitals, and then basically for 2 days I sat in a coffee corner, and then in their breaks they would have a coffee with me. And usually it ended up in them just getting their schedule out of their pockets and saying, okay, on their phone, yeah, I don't like this combination, or I don't like these days off. And then there would be all kinds of personal reasons, but I would try to get it to some kind of a formulation. An example is the consecutiveness, where people say, okay, this won't work, I should work 32 hours a week, but I feel like I'm only alive to work, which I thought was a bit, I don't know, heavy. But they said, and they showed me the schedule, and then it was something like working 2 days, 1 day off, working 3 days, 1 day off. And then if you only have like single days off, then you don't really feel like, okay, now I'm at work and now I have a weekend off. So you perceive it as, okay, I'm always at work. And they say, yeah, colleagues tell me, oh, you're already here and you're always here. And it didn't really help for the perception of the satisfaction. Yeah, they also said, without smaller blocks, I'm going to be out of here. So this is all about blocks. But then also a lot of other things came up, like predictability. If you know early in advance when you're supposed to work, then you actually can plan around it, like your dentist or your weekend trips, etc. So that means that if we can make the process of creating the schedule easier, then we can publish it faster, and then we have less difficult demands to take into account. But also just simply how people can communicate wishes. So they said, yeah, you can request something, and then a planner takes it into account for the next month, but next month after that, they already forgot about it, and then you have to tell them again, and it's a bit demotivating. And finally, in the interviews, people also said, yeah, the perception of having some control and understanding of why things sometimes cannot work out would be very appreciated, let's say. And then it would be less of something that's done to you. So now they just get their schedule, let's say 1 month after they or 2 months after they submitted their request. And they don't know why request A is adhered to and request B is not. So that could be communicated a bit more. and they would like to have a say on that. But that's all the employee part. And then the planners, they have their own process, where they set some criteria. So let's say fairness. If 3 people have a wish, then we want to make sure that people who had a lot of wishes last month probably do not get their wishes this month. Then they identify all kinds of alternatives, all kinds of schedules, and then based on those alternatives, they evaluate them and select a schedule. But we want to try and get these 3 steps in one go with mathematical optimization. Planners then, the criteria that they use are first of all the capacity. So in the end, a good schedule is a schedule that meets the capacity requirements. But also planners say they take into account a lot of preferences. It's just hard to sort of check if they really do or if they just think that they do. Because it's tough to take everything into account sort of with a human brain. And fairness. But again, that's difficult to measure because people who complain a lot, we perceive them to have been treated maybe unfair, but maybe they just complain a lot. So the people who complain the most then probably get the best schedule. So a lot of the subtleties come into play. And also planners value their autonomy. So currently we have this software that then has one button and you can optimize the whole schedule. Some planners are not really happy about it because they think that just hitting one button can never solve what you're used to doing by hand all the time. So that's a bit of autonomy that they want. Then moving to how we would approach it with mathematical optimization. So we collect some input. Interviews were the starting point for this, but then I also used a survey to get more information because I cannot talk to 300 people, but we can share a survey with 300 nurses. Based on that, we create a formulation and then we try to solve the problem and review the results. Based on that survey, so we had a lot of questions about things you could ever want in your schedule. And then the last question was, okay, out of these 5 categories, what would be the most important thing? So there was a category for weekend plans, night shifts, variability in shift types, block length, so consecutiveness, and then in general just the adherence to request. But actually we saw that the requests are by far most important, and then also this block length. So that means that people work, for example, like maybe Exomnia, but at least the company I work, we work Monday to Friday, 5 days, and then we have 2 days off, depending on your contract, but it's very regular. And for nurses, it can be this pattern of working 2 days, 1 day off, working 3 days, 4 days off. Consecutive means that they want some predictability in that. This slide, I'm going to pick some points and then tell them to you. Because we saw that preferences vastly differ between full-time and part-time people. And we also saw that part-time people usually share a lot of their requests and full-timers do not. So then full-timers basically are the ones that get the leftover shifts. And that sometimes could mean that their schedules are actually a lot worse than the part-time schedules, which seems a bit unfair. And there were differences in the group. So some people would like to actually work 7 consecutive days. And they said, I love a schedule with that. But a lot of other people said, I don't want it. I just want a block of 4 days. And then it would be nice to be able to take it into account in that mathematical formulation, such that the people who prefer long blocks, you actually give them long blocks. And people who do not, you actually do not give them long blocks, because it gives more flexibility in the number of solutions. And it also helps with nurse satisfaction. So then, what makes a good schedule? So all of this goes in before we can actually start solving the problem, because otherwise we do not really know what would be a good solution. But the main thing is, well, if we need 2 shifts every day, then if we schedule only 1, or if we schedule like 3, then we have 1 too many or 1 too few. Both is probably not good, but the unassigned shift is probably a bit worse than the over-assigned shift. So when we calculate based on the schedule the solution value, then it's going to be higher when we have more shifts left unassigned. And then we also add a penalty, so to say, to the solution value for not meeting the requests of nurses or employees. You could replace nurse with any employee. So let's say this person likes blocks of specific length, maybe working 3 consecutive shifts, and we plan this block of 2 consecutive shifts, then we get a penalty, of 1 in this case. But let's say the person also asked the weekend off, and we actually gave them the weekend off, so then there's no request penalty. And then you could also say, people can say, I find my requests more important than my block, so then there should be also a wait for them to communicate, okay, give me proper blocks or give me my requested days off. And that then becomes a score for this employee, and that we can use to find a total sort of solution value. So then horizontally, we check the quality per employee, and we also check these labor rules that I mentioned beforehand. But then vertically, we check, okay, do we actually meet the requirements of that day? And then this is going to be the translation to the mathematical optimization part. We have some hard constraints. So for example, skills. Let's say people cannot work shifts that they do not have the skills for. So we have that constraint. And then people cannot work more than their contract hours, unless you pay them probably a lot more. And hospitals often don't want that. So we also have a hard constraint on the contract hours. The daily rest I mentioned in the beginning. And also there's a weekly rest, which means that you cannot just work every single day in a row. But at some point in every rolling horizon 7-day period, you need 36 hours off or something else, but that's in the Dutch law. And then these constraints, they actually form the solution space or the search space. So within that set of boundaries, we can pick any solution, and then we have to check, okay, is this a good solution, or can we find something better that is also within these boundaries, but then has a higher solution value. So either meets more of the preferences or schedules more of the required shifts. Let me see, okay. Then this is a picture that's gonna come back. So then if we know those boundaries and if we know what would be a good solution, so that's why the surveys and the interviews and everything is important, because otherwise you're gonna look for the wrong thing basically, because you use that to see, okay, is this solution improving or not? If we get all that, then we can solve it. And the basics are that we set some boundaries on the feasible space, define a target, and then move towards the optimal solution within the feasible space. That's where this picture is coming back. So instead of the daily rest and the workload, etc., let's say you only have 2 decisions to make. So you have to pick an X1 and an X2, and you have some constraints. Then that red line could be sort of your optimal or solution value. And then it's a function also of those, we call it decision variables. So within the boundaries, then we want to say, okay, are we actually? So for example, X1 has to be positive, X2 has to be positive. That sort of defines that green area. And then that red line is a function of X1 and X2, saying, okay, if you set these values to whatever, then the solution quality is going to be on that line. And we want to either maximize or minimize that usually. So for the schedule, we define it, for example, as the sum of unassigned shifts. And we want to minimize that, given that we have all these constraints. But in the scheduling problem, we don't have only X1, X2, but we have X for every day shift nurse combination. And then it means that we set, for example, X equal to 1 if nurse X works shift Y on day Z. So then the picture becomes a bit difficult to draw. When the picture becomes a bit more difficult to draw, we can also not use simple methods, so we can also find an exact solution, which means that we cannot prove that out of all the feasible solutions, that would be the optimal one, so the one with the lowest amount of unassigned shifts. But we can we can use a heuristic approach where we then actually look for the best one, and we start from an initial roster. This can be made by we call it the greedy heuristic. It basically means that for every shift, we look at all the employees and we check, okay, which one would be the best one to assign the shift to. We do that and we move on to the next one. So piece by piece, we fill the schedule. And then you risk that, if you would have chosen something else in the beginning, maybe you would have ended up with a better schedule in the end. But we have to start somewhere. So we use that as an initial schedule, initial solution. That's the start. And then we're going to explore the neighbors of that solution. So that can mean that we make a swap across nurses, a swap within a nurse, or we add or remove a shift. Simple example, let's say Ekaterina and me, we work in the same department, and we have an initial schedule, and then we swap our Tuesday shifts, for example. Then you already have a new schedule, and you can calculate the quality of that schedule, because maybe I had a preference for a shift Ekaterina was working, and then now I'm more satisfied with the schedule. So then you could move to that neighbor. You could use that as your starting solution, and you could also explore the neighbors of that one. But it can also happen that you do not find an improvement. So then you swap something, but it actually gets worse. Then we look at either other neighbors. So let's say you still don't find an improvement. So we look for another swap, maybe within the nurse, or maybe you swap my original Tuesday shift now with my original Wednesday shift and also creates a new schedule. And then let's say you find an improvement when you swap shifts between two employees and one employee gets happier, but the other one does not get happier. So you kind of have an improvement, but you still need something else to make it a net improvement. Then we can make a chain of swaps. So you swap between employee A and B, and then you swap between employee B and C to get a total improvement for A, B, and C. I have some animation for that too. So let's say you add another swap and it's actually worse for everybody, so you definitely don't want that. But let's say you find some chain, and then if you add that swap, then if you do all three, then everybody is more satisfied. Although the risk with this is that you can get really long chains. So you probably want to prevent that. Because if you have to check for every swap that you do, if you do not find an improvement, but maybe if you add, let's say, 10 other swaps, then maybe you do get an improvement, but that means you have to check for every option if it actually gets better. And usually, given all the calculations you have to do to calculate the solution quality, that takes quite some time. So then it's not really efficient, and maybe you should just move on to a whole other neighborhood. Yeah, so if you find an improvement in the end, let's say that green schedule is an improved schedule, then you just start again from that schedule until you, for example, find no improvements anymore, or usually we just stop when we hit a pre-specified runtime, let's say an hour, for example, or less, depending a lot on a lot of things. This slide, I have to give credits to a colleague. Totally different approach. So you can go through neighbors of schedules and then see, okay, I make a simple swap and what's happening. That's, I think, quite intuitive. Maybe you don't agree, but then it's my explanation. This is a hybrid genetic search. Don't bother about the title. I'm just going to explain like a genetic search, because I think that's also quite intuitive. It's based on biology. Let's say you do initialization, and we first want to create a lot of different schedules. So I explained the greedy approach to just finding one schedule, going very like assigning the shift to the best employee until you're done. You can do that a lot of different times with some random element in it, and then you can create a pool of solutions. So in this case, it's not really about employee schedules, but let's imagine it is. You have a pool of solutions, and that's then your first population. Some solutions can be feasible, others cannot, based on labor laws or based on other constraints. Doesn't really matter at this point. But then based on that pool, you select 2 people, or 2 solutions, 2 schedules. And then you make some swaps as well within those 2 schedules. Or you say, okay, from schedule A, I'm taking, let's say it's a month schedule. You take the first 2 weeks of schedule A and the last 2 weeks of schedule B, and you just paste them together. Then you do get a new schedule. It could very well be infeasible, because if you just copy 2 schedules, then maybe you create a labor law violation at some point. But maybe you do create something that's a lot better. And that's a crossover. So you use 2 to create 2 new solutions. You can also do, it's called a mutation. So that's when you make one single swap within a schedule. All steps you can take to start from this pool of generation 0 and then make generation 1 or 2, 3, 4 with some new solutions. And then those new solutions, you can also evaluate them and see if you actually, by meshing them together, found something better. That's why it's based on, that's why it's called genetic search. Usually at the end of genetic search, so let's say you have 100 generations, for example, then you pick the best one, offspring creation, and the local search. I know this guy just had a baby, so maybe he was inspired by that. But then you can take that best solution and then do something like a neighborhood search, which is now also local search, to find, to sort of raise it and get some better solution if you then make some small changes, but not as many as you would do in the population and creating the generations, because it's also about diversifying your search base. So you want to make sure that you're not starting with one solution and then you're making a couple of swaps, and then if you see, okay, I cannot make any improvements, then maybe you think it's the best one, but maybe you're in a local optima and not really in the global optima, and then you could do actually a lot better if you escape it by maybe taking a really weird combination of it with another schedule. Or what we also sometimes do is just ruin and recreate, is when we take 3 random employees or the 3 worst employees and we just completely delete their schedule and then we recreate it. And sometimes that also helps to escape those local optima. And then local search is sort of a step you can take to make sure that within that area, so if you, for example, would only allow swaps of length 1, so that's simple swaps, then you can see if you can do better. I think for now, enough on the genetic search and local search. Maybe let's go back to the nurses. So I used not the genetic search algorithm, but the one with the ejection chain, actually, where you can make these long connections of swaps to find improvements in my thesis, but also in current research project, to see if we include the results from the survey in the objective. So that's the formula we use to evaluate solutions. Can we actually improve upon the satisfaction? So because we didn't know that, we needed to simulate preferences based on the survey results, and then included that in the objective. So I added them basically to the problem, and then I got solutions with the same capacity, but actually improved upon satisfaction, simply by including it. So that means that if before you had a schedule with 6 shifts unassigned, then if you do not include the preferences in the objective, in the formula for evaluation, then you might do very poorly on it, but then there might also be a schedule with 6 shifts unassigned that actually does really well on the satisfaction scores. And if you don't consider them at all, which kind of makes sense, then you would not have a preferences for the one where you actually meet all of the preferences. So we can always improve upon something in general, but in this case nurse satisfaction, by including it in the problem formulation. So that's also the takeaway. You just use it in the formulation and you collect the necessary data, and then it can be improved, and you can go back to the nurses and actually check with them, okay, is this in the end then a better schedule than what we had before we included all these? Because, well, it should, but maybe then other things pop up and they say, okay, but in that schedule I see I have, let me think. There's something about working a late shift on Friday, Saturday, Sunday off, and then working an early shift on Monday. So then the weekend sort of, I don't know, didn't feel like a complete weekend because you had to work Friday till 11 p.m. and then Monday you already had to be at work at 7 a.m. So they didn't like that at all. And that's now not included in the formulation. So maybe actually they say, okay, I want that to be in there as well, and then still not that happy. But that's to be seen. So what I liked about this was that it was a very collaborative process. So combining the interviews, the survey, and then the mathematics helped to understand the real problem. Because I noticed when I was just typing away or programming something, that sometimes these stories, they just stick with your brain and helps to make design choices. I did have some slides on more optimization. No mathematics, but I'm going to keep them short. So we also have other stuff you can optimize for. So let's say nurse health, which sometimes really conflicts with the preferences because they say, yeah, just give me 7 shifts in a row and then I have a long week off and then I can go on to a trip or something that I don't have to take my leave days for. But then the hospital might say, yeah, but we know if we give people such long streaks of shifts, then in a week or so they're going to be sick, or they're going to be unmotivated to work, or it's going to be bad for their health. So we do not want that, or we also have sort of an objective on the nurse health perspective, and then we want to actually maximize that. So it can be conflicting with the preferences of the nurses themselves. Sometimes they really want to go to a party in the weekends, and then they say, okay, let me work Friday till, I don't know, X, 11 or something, and then they go for something on a personal activity, and then it also conflicts with them being able to get back to work on Monday. So it does not matter at all for the optimization algorithm you use or anything, but it does matter for the solution, of course. And then there's also financial results and patient satisfaction. This is something that we're researching right now. So okay, if you also consider these, what would be the optimal solution? Which is on the formulation. And then on the solver part, you can say, okay, let's say you have two solvers. So let's say you have genetic and the variable neighborhood search. Then if one of them has a, so let's say solver A is decreasing still, even after, I now put it 10 seconds, but it's completely fake data. There is a potential that it's actually going to decrease a lot more. Although solver B kind of seems to converge already at 2 point something. So what would be a better solver? So that's more on the algorithm part of things. And we're still looking at both. So two aspects of the same problem. Yeah, so I thought if I'm going to present in Amsterdam, this is maybe funny. At the Rijksmuseum, they're using the scheduling tool that this algorithm is part of. But that's it, I think. If you have questions, then feel free. At Albert Heijn, we actually do something completely different. So you can do scheduling with optimization, but you can also do vehicle routing and a lot more, but let's say vehicle routing, which is about if a lot of people order groceries at home, then how do you calculate the best routes? So if you order a grocery at Albert Heijn, then you have all these time slots, and some are cheaper than others, and some are green, and some are very expensive. It's probably based on something like it can be easier to deliver your groceries at a certain time slot if your neighbor already ordered groceries to be delivered at a time. So then behind that is also this routing problem. My main takeaway was actually to talk to your end users, the direct and the indirect ones. So the planners are actually direct users of the tool, but the nurses are actually the indirect users of the tool, and they're actually affected by the solution that we create if the planners completely go by the algorithm, which they most of the time do not, but let's say. So talk to them, see if you can get a grasp of what they prefer, what they find important. Mathematical optimization is about finding an optimal solution given some constraints. It's also about getting to that real problem. And yeah, simulations can be nice to create some test scenarios and then actually show, like, okay, schedule A, schedule B, what do you like, why. It helps to sort of get the conversation to a more practical level. Okay, questions you can ask me now. You can also send me a message. It's my LinkedIn thing. Or talk at the drinks.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining my presentation today. My name is good. Okay, my name is Ekaterina, and I specialize in variable data analysis and time series prediction. Today, I'm excited to talk to you about the role of automated feature generation in time series analysis, specifically in the context of predicting biological age, using daily steps count and heart rate data. To begin with, yeah, I think it's good to tell what are the features, because yeah, maybe not everyone is doing machine learning or data science. So basically, you have your raw data. For example, you have daily steps. It's a row of numbers, and you want to aggregate it. For example, you can summarize them, like the sum of steps during the day, or the average number of days of steps for 1 minute, and this already will be a feature. Traditionally, we can do feature engineering just by these aggregations or by other mathematical functions. Yeah, we have a lot of pros for this method, but also some cons. For the pros, I'd say it's sorry, I think it's other way around. Yeah, so for traditional feature engineering, it's expertise-driven, and it requires domain knowledge. It's customizable, and it allows a lot of creativity because you can read a research paper and include some new features in your analysis, even if you think it's something crazy. It also provides control because you can introduce features and take them out. Yeah, that's fine. Also, of course, it's introduced bias because all the researchers are very different, and yeah, human bias is makes it difficult to reproduce the results that you are having. And also, it's not very scalable because if you have a large amount of like a big data set, yeah, you can spend a lot of days, you can spend weeks, you can spend half a year just to make this data set working for you. Yeah, and as I said, it's also time consuming. For automated feature generation, it doesn't allow any creativity because you just give it to some algorithm because it's algorithm driven, and it's also very efficient because you can, yeah, for example, I spent a lot of, spent 6 months finding the right features for my model myself, and then I used the algorithms, and yeah, we made the same. It made the same features that I came up with, I don't know, in 20 minutes. So of course it's really helpful, but yeah, in my case it's not very fair because I also knew which features will work, in my opinion, as a domain expert. But yeah, of course it's very helpful if you don't want to spend a lot of time on that. I want to, I made a small review of different Python packages that you can use for automated feature engineering. So one of the most popular is feature tools. The main core features of it are, it has a deep feature synthesis. It's a core functionality of feature tools. It allows automatically create features by stacking multiple primitive operations. For example, you can combine basic operations like sum or average with more complex operations like for Fourier transformation. It introduces a matrix of the features. It's called entity sets, and it makes a relationship in it. Yeah, it also introduces time index and windows. For example, you want to take rolling window average, and you can specify these numbers, and you can play with it all the way around, introduce numbers from 1 to 100. And yeah, it allows to produce a lot of features if you think it will be useful in your case. So what are the advantages? It's very popular, so there are a lot of tutorials. You can easily find them, and most likely it will work for your data very easily. Also, it allows specification of variable types, because, for example, if you have the date or you have a textual variable, you don't want to spend time on encoding them, you just can pass them to the package. Yeah, it can create expanding features with respect to time. There are also limitations. It creates a large number of features, which is not always good if you don't have domain knowledge or you have very small calculation abilities, and that's why you don't pass your model 1,000 parameters. It also requires normalization for non-relational databases, and it doesn't support unstructured data. Another one package is AutoFit. It automates the creation of new features from existing data. You can just pass your data set, and it also will come up with new features. It selects the most relevant features to reduce dimensionality. So, for example, it created 1,000 features, but then you will end up with 200 features. And it focuses on explainable models, and it can also give you a prediction using linear regression. And it also adjusts features to regression models. I think linear regression is a very powerful tool if you use it in the right way. So yeah, I would recommend using it. What are the advantages? It's also open source. You can find tutorials. It performs feature selection, and yeah, it prevents the creation of physically nonsensical features, and yeah, it makes it useful for logistic data. There are also limitations. It doesn't work with relational data. For example, if you have a big database, it cannot be used here. You have to aggregate it and clean it a bit. It creates simpler features than other packages, so it doesn't work for all the data sets. And it doesn't consider feature interactions and relation between the features. Also, it supports only regressions, not classifications. The next one is TS-Fresh. I really like this one because I specialize in time series. So for me, it's this was the endeavor. I really enjoyed working with it. TS-Fresh means time series feature extraction based on scalable hypothesis tests. So its main functionalities are: it provides a large number of predefined features, also 1,000, 2,000 features, including statistical metrics, also Fourier coefficients, autocorrelation measures, seasonality trends, it's one of its standout features is its ability to automatically select which features you should take care of. Not all the packages are having it, and for me it also reduced the number of features from 3,000 to 200 because there are Fourier coefficients. It can be 3,000 of Fourier coefficients. If you don't understand what's going on there, it will be just numbers. So it's very difficult to do it manually to select which ones you need to use. So that's good that there is already some help in it. In my case, it was very useful because I also could just pass the data set there and came up with the features. The advantages are it's one of the open source Python tools. It easily integrates with feature tools if you want to create more sophisticated feature engineering. For example, when it's already a deep learning model and you want to create features while the model is learning and working, you can use it too. And the limitation is it's limited to time series data, so it's not for everyone. The next one is Explore Kit. It's based on the intuition that highly informative features often result from manipulation of elementary ones, which is not always the case. It identifies common operators to transform each feature individually or combine them together. For example, you have a sum of steps and you divide it by number of days, so it also will be a combined feature. Key functionalities are it uses a common operator to transform and combine features. It ranks candidate features, so it also gives some navigation which features you should take into consideration. The advantages are it uses meta-learning to rank these candidates, and the limitations will be that there is no open source implementation available, so it might be difficult to use it. The last one is 1BM. It can handle relative data. It can handle multiple row tables. It combines it together. It automatically identifies data types, which also is very helpful if you don't want to clean your data set or do encoding. It uses feature extraction techniques from multiple sources. It can automatically identify data types and apply suitable feature engineering techniques, generating complex features. The advantages are that it works well with both relational and just a big data massive. It generates simple as well as complex features as some other packages. It's also tested in Kaggle, so you can also find some implementation if you want to play around with this package. And it can also handle big data, which is not the case for other packages. So now let's go for the main idea of this presentation, measurement of biological age. What is biological age? It's also a number. It's like your chronological age, but it shows what is your physiological state, if you're healthy or not. For example, you can be 35 physically, mentally 20, but your body is, I don't know, 55. So this is a very valuable feature, not only for your personal usage, but also there is some money behind it, because some insurance companies are using this value. For example, there is a strong correlation for biological age number with if you're a smoker or non-smoker. And for example, you are doing this questionnaire, you don't think that the insurance company will charge you more, but they actually check which sports you're doing, or if you're smoking, and then your insurance will grow high, and it's not because of their assumption, because the models are standing behind it. For other purposes, you can use it to, for example, do drug development if you want to simulate some drug responses. You also need to take into account what's biological age of different people, because, for example, you have a group of 100 people in clinical research and they're the same age, but you can see that they're different, so it can affect your data. And of course, there are differences for females and males, so it's also very interesting to check. Especially when the female healthcare, as you know, is not very well developed. So if models can help us, I will be really happy. So here I used, here you can see I used a small data set from Biobank and Haynes, and the pink is biological age that my model predicted, and blue is chronological age. So the data set is not very like the best one. That's why there is some bias, I think, and there are not so like difference in ages. It's not very big range of different ages. So of course it can vary, but for some age it showed very good correlation. So what did I do? I took data for steps, step count. I took daily step counts and used, already did the feature engineering. I used steps divided by minutes. So how many steps you do in a minute. And I used heart rate measurements, just BPMs. Then I also included there the data about users that we had there, because you also need to include, for example, the real age, and it's normal to use it in this model. Of course, we're predicting, for example, age, still you can include it into the model in some encoded way. And I also included the gender, because it can lead to some biases. And I played around with some information about health conditions of these people. And then I extracted features with TS-Fresh only from, exclusively from steps counts and BPMs, because these are time series. And in this way, you cannot forecast them, you just need to take a lot of features out of them. And then I filtered them with manual introduced features, no filtering because I introduced them, there are not so many of them. For automatically generated features, I filtered them myself and also used what was allowed with the package. And then evaluated how different these models worked. For manually selected features, I used autocorrelating function, moving average, seasonal trends, Fourier transformations, also spectral density, average and variance, also skew, because it's as it's a time series, it can have some skew. For example, you're having decline in your steps for some reason. And also curtices, and my love are entropy and complexity for time series, because they're showing very interesting patterns in time series. And the automatically generated features also included groups of features. Here I just included a few of just the groups of them, because there were like 300 of features. It was autocorrelation function, also moving average, a lot of Fourier transforms coefficients, also some aggregations, spectral density, rolling windows statistics. Here are how my models worked. The first two were using automated generated features. The two low ones, they used only manually generated features. The first and third are easy deep learning model, like a convolutional neural network, and two others are just regression. And we can see that with automatic generating features, the prediction, the orange line is very close to a blue line, the actual age that I was expected to see. And without automated generation features, there were some issues with predicting. Here, the models were not using any fine-tuning, of course, even with the features that I figured out manually. Of course, I can make a better model, but here you can see that the same models are working much better with the automated generated features. So model performance also, it says more than my other plots. So green is manually introduced features, and blue is for automated generating features. Yeah, here I also introduced a Shapley explainer just to see what will be the main components. So for automated generated feature model, yeah, agent smoking, smoking or non-smoking personality, yeah, it included a lot. Contributed a lot into the model, but also, yeah, there were Fourier transformations. Yeah, this is how these features are looking like linear trend. Yeah, for manual, somehow it was average step count, which is not very optimistic for the model. Probably I need to use another one. Yeah, also moving average. Automated generated features also included moving averages. Here I included one with window 5. So, of course, automated generated features in this case were more efficient. So, yeah, just to recap, the models using automated generating features, they performed much better. We can see it in performance metrics and yeah, just in accuracy of predictions. Yeah, it allowed also to identify which parameters, for example, autocorrelation function or seasonality, how they affect my data. So I can, for example, if I see that some seasonal trends are impacting my model, I can introduce dtrend. What are potential pitfalls using these features? It can cause overfitting, of course, because you're introducing a lot of features and you don't know what they're meaning. And yeah, one of them can basically mean the same as your target variable. It's yeah, it's not a good practice. Yeah, sometimes you can generate irrelevant features, then you see that this feature is very important in your model. Then you cannot explain it. It's also yeah, it's not very helpful. Yeah, and also, of course, it's computational complexity. If you're having a big data set to teach your model, you need to have a really big cluster to do these calculations. What else we can do for selection and validation? In model performing, it's feature selection. After generating features, you can still manually select them. Also, it's cross-validation. It can help with overfitting. Also, regularization, because still, if you just pass the original data set without any changes to automated feature generations, one feature will be 100, other 0, and 1. It's also requires some yeah, additional work. What are emerging trends using these automated features? It's using more advanced algorithms, because what I showed you, you can see, yeah, they can be helpful, but still they're relying on the same statistical parameters. They're using Fourier coefficients. Yeah, you don't need these packages to calculate them. You can calculate them by yourself. So yeah, if you can have more advanced algorithms, it will be very helpful, especially with these big data massives, for example, in genetics. Also, real-time feature generation. Your model is working, your model is learning and predicting, and it also can come up with new features while, yeah, while working. Also, explainable AI, because yeah, some features are very difficult to explain. So yeah, if some AI can help you to also come up with explanation, that would be great. Still, yeah, I think the last one is yeah, something we won't see in the next 5 years, but who knows. Yeah, also it can be integrated with other machine learning techniques. For example, I used it with a deep learning model, and yeah, you can find it also included into some models in the model pipeline. Also, it can be included into reinforcement learning. So, for example, your model is yeah, relearning, and you can introduce more features. And also AutoML platforms. Yeah, that's it.